In the small town of Willowbrook there was a grave that everyone spoke about, but no one dared to approach. At night, the grave glowed softly, casting an eerie light that seemed to pull anyone nearby into its mysterious charm. The glow wasn't natural, and some believed it was a sign from the past, something left behind by a life full of secrets. For years, the townspeople whispered about it, passing down stories to their children, warning them not to go near. But none of these stories ever explained why the grave shone so brightly or what it meant. One evening, Emma, a young journalist with a deep connection to the town, stood in front of the cemetery. She had heard the tales all her life, how the glow appeared only at night, how it never faded, and how no one had ever figured out its true meaning. Emma wasn't afraid. Instead, she felt a strange pull, like something inside her wanted to know what lay hidden beneath the surface. She had recently lost her mother, and the mystery of the grave seemed like a way to distract herself from her own grief. But as she stood there, staring at the glowing light, she felt a sense of unease she couldn't shake off. Emma had always been curious, but this was different. This wasn't just a story to uncover for the sake of a good article. It was something deeper. She had grown up hearing about the town's history, the people who lived here, and the long-forgotten secrets that lay buried in the soil. But this grave was different. It was almost as if it had a life of its own, a life that no one dared to remember or face. As Emma took a deep breath and stepped forward, her heart raced. The wind was still, the night quiet except for the distant rustling of leaves. She reached the grave and knelt down, feeling the cold stone beneath her fingers. The inscription on the gravestone was faded, barely readable, but it caught her attention. "Here lies Victor Hale, a man whose sins were too great for this world." Emma's curiosity burned stronger. Who was Victor Hale? And why did his grave glow? She felt an overwhelming urge to find out more, to uncover the secrets hidden behind the glowing stone. But as she gazed at the inscription, a thought crossed her mind. What if some secrets were better left undiscovered? What if this grave, this glowing light, was meant to warn those who came too close? Emma shook her head. No, she wasn't afraid. She was determined to find the truth, no matter how deep the mystery went. The glow was calling to her, urging her to discover what lay beneath the surface. Little did she know the truth she was about to uncover would change everything she thought she knew about this town and the life of Victor Hale. The following day, Emma began her search for answers. She headed straight for the town library, where old records and newspapers were kept. As she dug through dusty books and faded articles, she learned that Victor Hale had been a man of influence in Willowbrook years ago. He had been a wealthy landowner, known for his generosity but also for his mysterious behavior. People spoke of him in hushed tones, never truly explaining why he had such a dark cloud hanging over him. There were rumors of debts, failed relationships, and whispers about a scandal that had rocked the town many years ago. Emma's fingers traced the pages of an old newspaper from the year of Victor's death. The headline read, "Victor Hale found dead, a tragic end to a troubled life." The article detailed his sudden and unexpected death, but what struck Emma the most was the mention of a dispute with his closest friend, Thomas King. The two had been inseparable, but no one ever figured out what caused the fallout between them. Thomas had never spoken publicly about Victor's death, and his whereabouts had become a mystery after the funeral. Emma wondered if there was a connection between Thomas and the glowing grave. Could it be that Thomas held the key to understanding Victor's past? With this new lead, Emma sought out anyone who might remember Thomas. She went to the town's elderly residents, hoping they might have some answers. Most of them had forgotten, but one woman, Mrs. White, a frail figure with sharp eyes, seemed to know more than she let on. "Ah, Thomas King," she muttered, her voice soft but firm. "He was never the same after Victor died. Some said he blamed himself, but I've heard strange things about that grave. They say it's cursed, that the glow means something more than just the passing of time." Emma's heart raced at the mention of a curse. She didn't believe in such things, but there was something unsettling about the way Mrs. White spoke. The old woman's words lingered in Emma's mind as she made her way back to the cemetery later that evening. The glow of the grave was stronger tonight, and Emma's determination to uncover the truth grew. As she stood before Victor Hale's grave once again, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The air was thick with silence, and the glow of the grave seemed almost alive. She reached out, her fingers brushing the stone, and for a moment she felt an odd warmth seep through her skin. It was as if the grave was pulling her in, urging her to look deeper, to understand. Suddenly Emma heard a faint sound, a whisper on the wind. At first she thought it was nothing, just the night playing tricks on her. But then it came again, louder this time. "You'll never understand," the voice seemed to say, echoing in her mind. She spun around, but there was no one there. Only the glow of the grave and the quiet night. Shaken, but more determined than ever, Emma turned back to the grave. The secrets of Victor Hale were hidden somewhere beneath that glowing stone, and she was going to find them, no matter the cost. The whispers from the night stayed with Emma as she returned home, her mind racing with questions. Who could that voice have belonged to? Was it her imagination, or was there truly something otherworldly about Victor Hale's grave? Sleep eluded her, and by morning she resolved to dig deeper. Emma decided to visit Victor Hale's former estate, a sprawling but dilapidated mansion on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for decades, its grand halls now reduced to silence and cobwebs. The townsfolk avoided the place, calling it cursed. For Emma, however, it was the next logical step. If anyone kept secrets during their lifetime, their home was bound to hold some clue. Pushing open the creaky iron gates, Emma made her way to the front door. It took some effort, but she finally managed to force it open. Dust filled the air as sunlight filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper and cracked tiles. The place smelled of decay, but Emma pressed on, determined to find anything that could shed light on Victor's mysterious life. She searched for hours, scouring the mansion's library, bedroom, and study. It wasn't until she entered the attic that she stumbled upon something unusual. Beneath a pile of tattered blankets lay an old wooden chest, its edges worn with age. Emma's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing stacks of papers, photographs, and a sealed envelope with Victor's name written in bold, elegant handwriting. The seal had the initials T.K., Thomas King. Emma's breath hitched. Could this letter be from Victor's closest friend, the man who had vanished after his death? She carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The paper was yellowed with age, but the ink was still clear. It read, "Victor, I cannot undo what I've done, nor can I face the man I've become. The weight of my actions will haunt me until my dying breath. Your grave, your glow, is my curse and my punishment. What lies beneath will only be freed when the truth is revealed to the world. Forgive me, if you can. Thomas." Emma's heart raced as she reread the letter. What did Thomas mean by "what lies beneath"? And why was he blaming himself for Victor's death? The words carried the weight of regret and guilt, but they also hinted at something more, something that tied Thomas and Victor to the grave's glow. The pieces were coming together, but Emma still didn't have the full picture. She folded the letter and tucked it into her bag. As she descended the attic stairs, her thoughts spiraled. If the glow was tied to Thomas's actions, then the answers had to lie with him. But he was long gone. Or was he? Emma couldn't ignore the pull of the glowing grave. She felt as if the secrets were begging to be uncovered. With the letter in hand and a renewed determination, she knew she had to return to the cemetery. This time, she would come prepared to dig deeper, literally. The air grew colder as evening approached. Emma stood in her living room staring at the letter. The glow of the grave wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a puzzle, and she was holding the first piece. Whatever Thomas King had done, whatever Victor Hale's grave hid, Emma was certain of one thing. The truth was buried deep, waiting for her to uncover it. By the time Emma arrived at the cemetery, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the tombstones. The glow from Victor Hale's grave seemed brighter than ever, almost pulsating, as if it knew she was coming. The letter from Thomas King was tucked safely in her pocket, a constant reminder of the burden of secrets waiting to be unearthed. Emma brought a small spade, the kind meant for planting flowers, but it felt heavy in her hand as she stood before the glowing grave. Her heartbeat quickened. She hesitated, looking around. The cemetery was deserted, silent except for the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she really about to disturb the dead? But the letter's words echoed in her mind. What lies beneath will only be freed when the truth is revealed. Taking a deep breath, Emma knelt by the grave and began digging. The soil was damp and cold, clinging to her hands as she worked. The glow seemed to intensify with each shovelful of dirt she removed, illuminating her task in an almost unnatural light. It wasn't long before her spade struck something solid. Emma's hands trembled as she cleared the remaining soil, revealing an ornate wooden box, its surface intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize. The box was old, but surprisingly well preserved, as though it had been waiting for her. She lifted it carefully, brushing off the dirt, and set it beside her. For a moment she simply stared at it, her breath shallow. What could be inside? A sense of unease washed over her, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She unlatched the box and slowly opened it. Inside was a collection of items: a gold pocket watch, a faded photograph of Victor Hale and Thomas King, and a small folded piece of parchment. Emma unfolded the parchment, her eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. It was a confession written by Thomas King. Victor, my dear friend, I wronged you in a way no man should ever wrong another. I coveted what was yours, your wealth, your reputation, your trust, and in my greed I betrayed you. The night you died I stood silent when I could have saved you. The glowing stone is my punishment, a reminder of the light I extinguished. To anyone who reads this, know that the truth has been buried with me. The glow will remain until the world knows of my treachery. I pray this confession finds its way to justice. Emma's breath hitched. The letter confirmed her suspicions. Thomas had been complicit in Victor's death. But how? The details were missing, leaving her with more questions than answers. She looked at the photograph again. Victor and Thomas stood side by side, smiling, their friendship once unbroken. As Emma placed the items back into the box, a cold gust of wind swept through the cemetery, extinguishing the glow for a fleeting moment. She froze, her skin prickling with fear. When the glow returned, it was dimmer, flickering like a dying flame. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the grave had reacted to her discovery. It was as if the secrets she had uncovered were beginning to stir something buried even deeper. This wasn't just about guilt or betrayal. The glowing grave held a power she didn't yet understand. Determined to uncover the full truth, Emma knew her journey was far from over. If Thomas's confession was real, then his guilt extended beyond mere words. And the grave, Victor's grave, was more than just a resting place. It was a symbol, a gateway to a truth that refused to stay buried. Emma spent the next morning piecing together the fragments of Victor and Thomas's story. The confession had given her a glimpse of the betrayal, but not the full picture. Why had Thomas stood silent when Victor died? What exactly had happened that night? The glowing grave still felt like an enigma, a warning, a curse, or perhaps something far more personal. She decided to revisit Mrs. White, the elderly woman who had hinted at a curse tied to the grave. This time Emma brought the confession and the photograph. When she arrived at Mrs. White's modest home, the old woman greeted her with a knowing look, as if she had been expecting her. Emma laid out the items on the small wooden table in Mrs. White's living room. The photograph caught the old woman's eye first. She picked it up with trembling hands and whispered, "They were inseparable, those two. Everyone thought they'd be friends for life." Emma leaned forward. "Mrs. White, do you know what happened between them? Why Thomas wrote this confession?" The old woman sighed, her expression heavy with sorrow. "Victor and Thomas had a falling out over something precious. It wasn't money or land, it was love. Victor was engaged to a woman named Eleanor, and Thomas was in love with her too. But Victor didn't know. Eleanor. She cared for both men, but she chose Victor. It destroyed Thomas. He couldn't bear to see them together." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Did Thomas hurt Victor because of Eleanor? Mrs. White shook her head slowly. Number. At least, not directly. But on the night Victor died, they argued. Thomas had been drinking and he said things he shouldn't have. He stormed out, leaving Victor alone. Later that night, Victor was found dead near the river. Some said it was an accident. Others believed it was foul play. But Thomas always blamed himself for leaving. He believed his anger had cursed them both. Emma's mind raced. The glowing grave wasn't just a symbol of betrayal, it was a marker of unresolved guilt and heartbreak. The letter's mention of the glow being Thomas's punishment made sense now. He had carried the weight of Victor's death, believing his actions had doomed his friend's soul to restless limbo. Mrs. White's voice softened. Eleanor left town soon after the funeral. Some say she couldn't bear the shame or the grief, but there's one thing you need to know, child. Thomas didn't just vanish. He's buried here in Willowbrook, too. Emma's eyes widened. He's buried here? Where? Mrs. White gestured toward the cemetery. Not far from Victor's grave. They're tied together, you see. Two graves glowing in the dark, reminding us of the cost of jealousy and love lost. Emma's breath caught. Two glowing graves. Why had no one ever mentioned this before? The thought sent a shiver through her. If Thomas's grave also glowed, then the mystery wasn't confined to Victor alone. The connection between them ran deeper than she'd realized. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Emma returned to the cemetery. She found herself drawn to a secluded corner where an unmarked grave stood bathed in a faint, flickering glow. It was less bright than Victor's, but unmistakable. The same eerie light pulsed softly, as if it were alive. Emma knelt beside the grave, her heart pounding. If Victor's grave held a confession, what could be hidden beneath Thomas's? She knew one thing for certain. The truth was closer than ever, but uncovering it meant digging deeper, both into the graves and into the darkest corners of their shared past. Emma's hands trembled as she stood before Thomas King's glowing grave. The faint light seemed to call out to her, just as Victor's had. The letter, the photograph, and the glowing graves all pointed to one undeniable truth. There was more to their story than betrayal and guilt. Emma knelt and began digging again, the soft earth giving way beneath her spade. As she dug, the glow grew stronger, illuminating the surrounding gravestones in a pale, eerie light. It wasn't long before she struck something solid, another wooden box, smaller and simpler than the one in Victor's grave. She lifted it carefully, her breath catching as she opened it. Inside was a single item, a ring. It was gold, with a delicate engraving on the inside, E+V. Emma recognized it immediately. It was an engagement ring, the one Victor had intended for Eleanor. Beneath the ring was a folded piece of parchment, much like the one she'd found in Victor's grave. Emma unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. Eleanor, I write this knowing I will not find peace in this life. My jealousy destroyed everything. I let my anger blind me, and in doing so I took from Victor what he cherished most, his future with you. The argument we had that night pushed him to the river, but it wasn't an accident. I followed him, driven by rage, and in my moment of weakness, I pushed him. He fell and the current took him before I could save him. I lived the rest of my days haunted by what I'd done, unable to face you or the town. I buried Victor's ring in my own grave as a symbol of my guilt, knowing it would never reach you. The glow, it is our punishment. Until someone uncovers the truth, neither of us will rest. To the one who finds this, I beg of you, tell the world what I've done. Let the light fade, and may Victor find peace at last. Emma's heart pounded as the weight of Thomas's confession hit her. The glowing graves weren't just symbols of guilt, they were prisons, holding Victor and Thomas in limbo until the truth was revealed. The love triangle, the betrayal, the anger, it had all led to that fateful night by the river. As Emma stood, the glow from Thomas's grave began to dim, flickering like a candle in the wind. She turned toward Victor's grave, watching as its light followed suit. The truth was out now, the burden lifted. But Emma wasn't finished. She returned to town, carrying both confessions. The next morning she presented them to the local historical society, ensuring that Victor and Thomas's story would be preserved. The town deserved to know the truth about the two men who had been so intricately tied in life and death. That evening, Emma visited the cemetery one last time. Both graves were dark now, their glow extinguished. The air was still, and for the first time the space felt peaceful. As she stood there, a soft breeze swept through the cemetery, carrying with it a sense of release. Emma placed the ring on Victor's grave, whispering, "Rest now, both of you." As she walked away, the moonlight bathed the graves in its soft glow. The secrets they had held for so long were finally free, and so were the souls bound to them. News of Emma's discovery spread quickly through Willowbrook. The confessions of Thomas King and the story of Victor Hale became the talk of the town. What had been whispered as legend was now revealed as truth, leaving the townsfolk in a mix of shock, sorrow, and guilt. For decades they had believed the glowing graves to be nothing more than a strange phenomenon, yet they had ignored the deeper pain buried within their own history. The local historical society decided to hold a small memorial in honor of Victor Hale and Thomas King. It wasn't just to acknowledge the truth, but to heal the wounds left behind. The event was held at the cemetery, where the townsfolk gathered for the first time in years. Emma stood at the center of the crowd holding a copy of the confessions. She shared their story, not as a tale of betrayal but as one of humanity, love, and regret. Her voice carried through the still night air, recounting the tragic night by the river, the burden of guilt Thomas carried, and the undying love Victor had for Eleanor. As she spoke, tears welled in the eyes of those gathered. The older generation, who had known Victor and Thomas, nodded solemnly while the younger ones listened intently, learning the lessons buried in their town's past. When Emma finished, the crowd stood in silence. A single candle was lit and placed on Victor's grave, a gesture of forgiveness and peace. One by one, others followed, lighting candles for both graves, their soft glow replacing the unnatural light that had once haunted the cemetery. As the night deepened, the wind carried a faint sense of calm. The weight of untold stories had finally lifted, and the cemetery no longer felt like a place of sorrow, but one of closure. Emma stood at the back, watching as the townsfolk shared memories and comforted one another. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You did a good thing." She turned to see an elderly man with kind eyes standing beside her. He introduced himself as a descendant of Eleanor's family. Eleanor never forgave herself for leaving. She always believed she could have done something to stop it all. "I think this will finally give her peace, too." Emma smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. "It was never about me. They deserved the truth, and so did everyone here." As the crowd began to disperse, Emma stayed behind, walking between the graves one last time. The air felt lighter now, the oppressive energy gone. The glowing graves had told their story, and with that their purpose was complete. Standing in the moonlight, Emma felt a quiet sense of pride. She hadn't just uncovered a mystery, she had given a voice to the silenced, a resolution to the unresolved. As she left the cemetery, she glanced back one final time, knowing the graves and the souls tied to them were finally at peace. Months passed, and Willowbrook began to embrace its past rather than shy away from it. The cemetery, once an eerie and avoided place, became a site of quiet reflection. Visitors would leave flowers, notes, and candles on the graves of Victor Hale and Thomas King, honoring their story as a reminder of love, jealousy, and redemption. Emma, however, couldn't shake the feeling that her connection to the graves hadn't fully ended. One evening, as the summer sun cast its golden glow over the cemetery, she felt drawn back as though an unseen force was calling her. When she arrived, the cemetery was quiet, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. She walked toward the now dark graves of Victor and Thomas, her footsteps slow and deliberate. As she stood between them, she noticed something peculiar. A faint glow appeared, not from the graves, but from the space between them. Emma crouched, brushing away the grass and dirt. Beneath her hand, she uncovered a small plaque that had been buried for years. The engraving was simple, but powerful. In life, bound by love and betrayal. In death, united by truth. A lump formed in Emma's throat as she traced the words with her fingers. The glow faded, but the message lingered in her mind. This wasn't just a resolution for Victor and Thomas. It was a message for everyone. The truth, no matter how painful, had the power to heal and unite. As Emma stood, the cemetery seemed to hum with quiet energy, as though it were alive with gratitude. A soft breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine, and for the briefest moment she thought she heard laughter, light and carefree, like the sound of two old friends reunited at last. Emma smiled, a quiet peace settling over her. The glowing graves had once been a mystery, but now they were a symbol, a beacon of hope for those willing to confront the past and embrace the truth. As she walked away, the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the graves. Emma knew this light, unlike the eerie glow of before, would never fade. It would live on in the hearts of the people who had learned from the story, and in her own journey of uncovering the secrets buried beneath the surface. For Emma, the glowing graves had become more than a mystery to solve. They had changed her, showing her the power of courage, the necessity of truth, and the beauty of letting go.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.